Thank you so much for speaking to me. Wow is literally what I have to say. Wow.
Right?
When I want to know, because when you got the script, what is your process of breaking everything down? Was it the visuals that inspired the look and how the entire episode really felt?
Yeah, I mean, when I get a script, the very first thing I do is I read it with no one in the room, with no pen in my hand. I don't start marking up and starting to break it down. I read it and I really take just mental notes of where I feel things. What am I feeling? Because I feel like then my obligation is to remember that and recall that. And that's my obligation to the audience, to make sure I am communicating what I felt, that I get that on the screen so they can feel it too. So that first read is so important, because once you start breaking it down into its elements, then it becomes production and this and that and this and that. And so that first read is super important, to read it just wide open, to feel it as an audience, right? But then it is such a big episode. I had 3 big deaths, is trying to determine how those 3 deaths would be shot, how they would be different from each other, and how we would send each character off in the way that they should be. And Walter being the most obvious challenge there, is that he's such a formidable character that he is sent off in a big epic kind of way. I wanted him to have an epic death, an epic gun battle, him being heroic until the very end, right? And he even directing his own death at the end when he tells Vic to pull the trigger, right? It's like Walter being Walter until the bitter end, right? And so, the process was storyboarding it. Once we got it, we storyboarded it, broke it down, meetings with stunt coordinators and with our DP Jody, and figuring out how we wanted to light it and shoot it. And then with the stunt coordinator giving him time to rehearse, and he had the day before, he rehearsed for 6 hours with all the stuntmen, and even Paulie was there to do the fall into the water and rehearse that. So that when I got Tommy Flanagan on the set the next night to shoot with him, it was really focused on Tommy and Vic, like Shane, Vic, and Walter, that I didn't have to get too lost in the weeds with all the stunt action of it, because I'd already worked all of that out. And so it was like working with camera and working with Walter and Vic about what we're doing and what needs to happen and what we're trying to get to, right?
So what was interesting with his death in particular, I wanted to know, was it intentional? The shot, it looked like he shot him through the eye, as in terms of like an eye for an eye. Was that a very intentional of
Yeah, very much so. It's like you took out Gloria. It was that eye for an eye. Absolutely. Yep. There's Shakespearean and Old Testament kind of things happening in this moment, right?
So what would you say? Because you brought up the Shakespearean part of it. Was it something that kind of inspired you? It felt kind of Godfather-like when they came and invaded the home and they had this very detailed precision. Was there a particular kind of inspiration that you pulled from, or was it already in the script?
The invasion, I mean, there was a lot of interpretation for me to do. And so just, it's always when you get your script and then you have to find it, how to make it work on the property, on the location, the practical location, who's coming from where and who's doing what, and how do they move from point A to point B, and they're exposed. Is someone going to shoot them? How do we get them undercover and still being able to, proceed in advance? And so it's a real, it takes some time to, it's kind of, you beat it all out, one beat at a time. Paulie shoots the guy, then his Paulie bodyguard gets shot. Now I got to advance Paulie all the way down to the end of the pool so he can fall into the pool and get down there so Big Red can be down there and shoot him. And so it's like really plotting it out and blocking where everyone goes and at what beat. And you really I call it just beating it out at that point,
So also kind of with Walter, do you feel, well, obviously you do, can you kind of share anything of how that will change the dynamic of the family?
Yeah, there's definitely going to be a vacuum at the top, right? And you can see there's going to be what we think, Claudia thinks there's going to be a sibling rivalry for who's going to lead, right? Because she thought she took care of it, right? And now that Vic shows up, now for her, she's going to have to try to figure out how she can become queen and beat him to the top, right? And now we see with Vic is turning over on her and he's going to give up his sister, right? And so the dynamic is going to be very different. What Shane's going to have to go through, Vic, is going to be very interesting, because now he's lying to Claudia about who he really is and what he's doing. He's also saying at the end of 5 that he's willing to go after Tommy. And so what does that mean with his relationship with Tommy, and what's that going to look like?
Right. So shifting over to DMAC, Darnell was a huge thing. I was like, oh, he's dying this episode. But he didn't. He lived. But the tone, I was really interested in the tone, because it really felt like, you know, it was his time to go.
Yeah, that was something Gary and I talked about a lot before I shot. And we really wanted the audience to feel like DMAC fucked up. Shooting a cop could blow a giant hole in Tommy's operation, right? If DMAC got arrested, got back to Tommy because he's CBI and this and that and the other thing, Tommy's goals are really at risk. And so we really wanted to feel like Tommy will do anything to take over the drug trade. And we saw that in Power, you know, and Kate knows what Tommy has done. Tommy killed his dad, right? Kate knows. Like, so when he says, you'll do nothing, and Kate realizes that he would kill her if he needed to. Kate believes that he killed DMAC in that moment, and she loses her sobriety over it, right? And starts using over it. And I love that moment, that turn with Joseph, that what he did in the kitchen with Kate is so strong. It's so, oh, there he is. There's Tommy, right? Mm-hmm. He will do whatever he needs. And so it's a nice reveal. I love like just the suspense of the van pulling up, and there's that like low crane shot, and the van's coming, footsteps out, and we kind of come up to the door, and they open the door, and you see him laying in there. But then he kind of helps himself to sit up, and you're like, oh, thank God he's not dead.
Was there any discussion on whether or not the character would live in that episode?
No, it was Gary wanted him still alive.
Okay. I was just wondering about that. Moving over to the police, we have Stacy and her partner. There again seems to be a climb to the top, Power, as it's called.
Always.
That scene, it always seems like it's a cat and mouse. We don't know what each other is thinking. Everyone is trying to figure each other out. The dynamic with that relationship, can you kind of explain whether or not Stacy is willing to do anything? Is it a personal thing for her, or is it really, I care about the street?
Isn't it interesting? I think Stacy started caring about the street, right? I think everyone who gets into politics and government and what have you cares about doing the right thing. I also think that Stacy's ambition for power clouds her judgment sometimes. And Bobby, her husband, who's the police, DeFranco, sees it, right? And he's trying to temper her a little bit. But her ambition, she's got eyes on mayor, right? She's got eyes on some bigger opportunity. And if she can take out the cartel, the whole ball of wax in Chicago, I think she's going to bend some rules.
Right. Do you view this episode in a way, there's a weird, interesting dynamic between Kate and Vic, that originally it seemed like this could be Kate's redemption story. And now that we see she's relapsed, and then we see Vic finally take the crown Vic. Do you view this season with these characters as there being a redemption within these two?
Yeah, I think there's always the hope. You know, you want to keep the hope of redemption, right? There's always the hope that human nature will make the right choice, and that their humanness and goodness will bubble up, right? I think Kate's fall is so tragic because she's been, Patricia, who plays Kate, has been so wonderful this season, and seeing this whole different side of her has been really delightful to watch her play in the longing. And I say that word, I feel like there's a lot of longing in this episode, of longing to connect and longing to belong and what have you. And Vic, I feel like his redemption is he's turning the corner. He's going to do the right thing. He wants out. And so you see him says he's making that choice at the end, right? And we'll see what happens.
Right. So Jannard also kind of lost his way in this season. Yeah. Very touching. I'm happy he's still alive. But he ended up having a very meaningful conversation with Diamond, even though Diamond lied to him in order to save him, essentially. I was wondering, how do you think their dynamic is going to be? because their issues are not fully resolved, but there is some sense of closure. Was the intent this episode to give them that closure? Or was it really more to say, without Diamond, Jannard is going to continue to fall?
I think it's both. Without Diamond, I think Jannard would continue to fall. He needs his big brother right now. And especially in the moment of losing the father, Diamond's doing what his dad asked. Look out for Jannard. He is not as strong as you, right? And so Diamond makes that choice. And I love that moment. Isaac was saying, you know, he wishes he had been with us more. You were always favorite. And Isaac got caught and pushed back the tears that were starting to bubble up, right? It's such a powerful moment. Yeah, so the inviting, you know, what do we do? And we need to be back together. That's not an easy path, right? If they decide to join forces and go back together, that's not going to be an easy path. I don't know if Tommy is going to be welcoming Jannard back into the fold, right?
Right. And also the gangs are completely split. We did have the what was it, the not the drive-by, it was, sorry, kind of like an execution almost style, or they shot up the diner, basically.
Yeah, right.
Which was, I love the fact that this season we're taking it to the streets. Can you talk about the different locations it's filming for this season? Because it's not just a secluded area. We're in the streets. We're living in the city.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. A couple of things. One is that we really wanted Force, and the difference from season 1 to season 2. I think Gary and I really wanted Force to feel that we are in Chicago, and we're not just on Michigan Avenue, right? We're in the South Side. We're in the West Side. We see iconic Chicago diners and barbecues and streets and the Regal Theater and like parts that are iconic to this community, right? And going to these practical locations, it's challenging because it's always easier to shoot on stage, right? Going out, trucks and this and that. But that, for me as a director, I always say, pick good locations and cast good actors, right? And so it's like fighting for those good locations and shooting, going back to Slick's Diner to shoot there and shoot it up and blast the window out and have that big shootout, right? It was important to be back where Diamond goes, right? When he sort of needs his moment, right? And so we were there, and it was really fun.
Right. So overall with this really seems like to be a changing of the guard in terms of that. With this episode, I was wondering, do you look at previous episodes in order to set the tone for this, or do you just focus on this is my script?
Oh, no. I mean, you know, I'm a supervising producer on the show too. Right. Okay. So I've been involved from the beginning. So I have all of that knowledge and storytelling sort of embedded, because I'm overseeing all the directors on the other episodes and all the tone meetings and, you know, in the process producing as well. So it very much influences the tone and the story that we're telling. It's like we're building, and we are building this season on story on top of story. And so it's really important to continue. You know, the nice thing is, you know, Gary's open to letting the directors interpret their visuals, right? We have a language that we abide to with Jody and Jody, our cinematographer, and Chase, our production designer, that we stay in that world. And we have a new flavor this year that I feels different than last season in terms of color and styling and camera, costume design. But we stay in that world, but the director can play in that playground. There's no hard and fast rules.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for speaking to me. I love this season. I love what you've done. You have no idea. Like, I am excited.
Thank you. We are too. We're so proud of it. I hope it resonates with the audience. I think it's a really great season of TV. So thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.